Dune is a 2021 science fiction adventure drama directed by Denis Villeneuve, starring Timothee Chalamet, Rebecca Ferguson, Oscar Isaac, Jason Momoa, Josh Brolin, and Javier Bardem. It is the highly anticipated and latest adaptation of Frank Herbert's classic novel, after David Lynch's infamous attempt in the 1980s and Alejandro Jodorowsky's effort at the so-called unfilmable book. Dune is probably the biggest film of 2021, much talked about, and already a sequel has been greenlit. I watched this film in cinemas, and I don't tend to really go to the cinemas. I also watched it in IMAX, and I've only ever seen one film in IMAX, which, funnily enough, was the director's previous film, Blade Runner 2049. I think it's worth mentioning those two facts because if you catch me saying repeatedly in this review that the film was epic and cool and grandiose, it may be that my opinion has been skewed by the conditions in which I watched the film. In fact, after watching the movie, when I was at home, I did flick through the film and it didn't quite have the same effect. So I do think this is a movie that is better enjoyed on a screen as big as possible, with a sound system as good as possible. Anyway, I've never read any of the Dune books. I've never seen any of the previous versions of the film. I knew nothing about the movie going in except it was a sci-fi epic. So the story is really simple. In fact, it's actually quite basic and probably the one stone in the film's shoe that really stops it from being a truly great film. I have to apologize, I can't quite remember the names of all the factions and planets, but there is a desert planet inhabited by desert people and colossal earthworms which holds a valuable natural mineral which is harvested by imperial forces, who clash with the indigenous population. Think something like the American military invading Iraq for its oil. There's this elusive emperor who's taken the rights of harvesting the minerals from the desert planet from one faction, full of creepy and evil characters, and given it to our main characters, the leader of whom is Oscar Isaac. But there's mystery in the air, a sense of foreboding, uneasiness, potential treachery, and impending doom. Why did the emperor suddenly choose all of a sudden to give the rights to these guys? Is something afoot? Meanwhile, the son of Isaac, Paul, played by Chalamet, is going through a coming-of-age development, and he wrestles with having to live up to take his father's place as the head of his people, and goes through a series of events whereby he may or may not end up leading the Sand People's resistance to the Imperial forces. It's quite a well-known story template. We've seen similar things done in Avatar, The Last Samurai, Dances with Wolves. The movie also owes a lot to Star Wars, although I suppose, seeing as though the book Dune came first, it's probably the other way around. It feels like a grim version of Star Wars, one with a sense of constant dread and unease instead of a whimsical, adventurous tone. And there was even one scene which was almost a carbon copy of the Luke use the Force part from A New Hope. In the current climate, it was actually quite nice to see a mainstream movie with a young male in the lead role in a rite-of-passage storyline, especially with his bond and relationship with his father given such importance, themes of leadership and being the chosen one front and center. The bad guys all look ugly and weird, the good guys clean and beautiful. That, and as mentioned the story template, gives the film a very old school feel. It's an old school film, made utilizing the very latest in the movie world's technology. I had no idea what was going on half the time in the film, but that was good. It was nice to see the film keeping you on your toes, not playing its hand too quickly, letting you ponder on the motivations and intentions of characters and factions. I thought Dune was a very good film. It was stupendous to look at. It was a really good-looking film, a visual feast for the eyes. It seems to seek to awe you with every shot, almost every frame a worthy wallpaper background. Epic is a word thrown around a lot, but it's a word worth describing for Denis's Dune. The special effects were amazing, the overall world-building and the characters were intriguing. The best thing about the film is the visuals, the attack on the base, the sandworm, the shots of those helicopter things flying around. There was a lot of great imagery. The acting was satisfactory from everyone involved. Personally, I might have favoured having a lot more alien, foreign and authentic unknowns cast for wacky roles, instead of A-list actors who pop up, say a quick hi and then die. But you're not going to get a $165 million sci-fi movie made with unknowns, so I accept that. The score was quite alien-sounding. Hans Zimmer delivered something more akin to noise than music, and the IMAX sound system made it difficult to decipher what was music and what was diegetic sound. A lot of wailing and humming, even throat singing and Scottish bagpipes, but perfectly in tune with what the film is going for. The action could have been beefed up a bit. It felt pretty ordinary, and for a film with mature tones and complex topics, there could have been a little more brutality in the fight scenes. The R-rated action movie lover inside me did wince slightly when I heard that the film was PG-13. Though the film was a visual treat, the story did leave a lot to be desired. On one hand, I'm so happy that the movie chose to take its time to let us get soaked into the world building, the sets, the locations, and the characters, and this really does seem like a universe worth getting your teeth sunk into. But you can't help feeling, after 2.5 hours have flown by, that not a lot happened in the movie, and it feels like the first half of a film where most of the juicier bits in the story have been saved for the sequel. And that's really the film's biggest issue. It seems insistent at impressing you with its visuals, which you knew were going to be great coming from the director of the Blade Runner sequel, rather than entertaining you with a solid story. But to be honest, it's not an issue at all, because the movie is well aware of the fact that it's telling half a story. It boldly opens with not a title card saying Dune, but Dune Part 1, so it knows what the score is, and from what I gather, the film has told pretty much the first half of the first of Herbert's books in the series. This is one of those movies that is definitely going to be improved by the sequel, and is going to be much more loved in a time where you can watch this one and then pop in the sequel into your Blu-ray as soon as Part 1 is done, instead of waiting 2 or 3 years for the second half of the film. What I'm guessing this movie is a prequel, a prologue, a precursor to a more epic grand adventure, but it finishes as soon as you feel the main story is just starting to get going. You know, there's something about the film, and don't get me wrong, it's a great film, but there's something about it, I can't quite put my finger on it, but something about it just doesn't quite do it for me. And it's something I felt with Denis's other films too. I mean, this guy is an amazing director, and I've loved all the films he's done that I've seen. Enemy, Sicario, Blade Runner 2049, Arrival, Prisoners. But there's something about his films that leaves me with an unscratched itch. It's like an emptiness, a hollowness, which is an undercurrent in almost his entire filmography. Maybe I'm just talking out of my ass, but there is something about his films, as amazing as they are, that just leaves me a bit flat. I've wondered for a long time what it is, trying to put my finger on it, and one theory that I have is that in spite of Denis's brilliance as a filmmaker, I don't see his personal stamp on his movies. Authors like Martin Scorsese, Spike Lee, Quentin Tarantino, Christopher Nolan, David Fincher, the Coen brothers, with these guys, you don't even have to see their names on their films half the time to know that they directed them. Their signatures are all over their works. And while Denis is no workman director, he's one whose name should definitely be up there with the best in the business at the moment. But I just can't see his own personal authority slapped all over his films. And Dune is one of the biggest victims of this. It's a great sci-fi epic, but what is its identity? Because as of now, that's all it is, a great sci-fi epic. Denis also tends to have his production design colossal but bare, with huge but lifeless buildings, and you start to notice more and more in films like Dune and Blade Runner 2049, people entering grandiose buildings thousands of feet high with huge shadowy rooms that seem clinically sterile and clean and with only 3 people in them. One thing I found interesting, something that I have heard is from the books, is that the groundwork for the story is based on Islamic theology and Arabic culture. As someone who has a lot of knowledge on Islam and knows a bit of Arabic, it was interesting seeing things like women in headscarves, the concept and literal name drop of the phrase Mahdi, and other Islamic terms and phenomena. That's pretty cool and different, isn't it? Because when we watch sci-fi films set in the distant future, we just kind of assume it's our liberal, secular, Western world civilization that survives into the future. But what if it was another? An African society, an Arab society? And Dune is one such film that actualizes that concept. Anyway, I found Dune to be a wonderful looking, albeit slightly soulless peek into a world I imagine we're going to be seeing a lot more of in the future, and I give it a 7.5 out of 10.